that leads us to driver of the day and championship standings then to close us out. Now, difficult one, driver of the day this race, because it was there's a lot of mixed results. And I've said before that I like to use my driver of the day to maybe highlight really great performances that aren't always talked about as well, because I think it's easy to say Hamilton, for example, who
Yeah.
went from being in a position where it looked like, oh, maybe early on in the race, it was like, oh, maybe this is Bottas's chance to shine. Can Verstappen continue to hammer home the power of Red Bull this season? But Hamilton was just, other than his being caught napping at the restart, he seemed pretty flawless overall. My honourable mentions, though, I do want to give for Alonso, who he looked a lot more comfortable than anyone else on hards. Was able to capitalise on those struggling near the end of the race to make up a healthy number of positions. But he was a little bit static and unremarkable for about 75% of the distance for me. Honourable mention for Ricciardo as well, who ended up grabbing a couple of points for McLaren after a pretty gutting P16 start. So that was a good recovery. But I think my driver of the day is going to be someone that I don't think we've even mentioned in this entire podcast, which is Charles Leclerc.
Okay.
He had a pretty quiet race, but he didn't seem to struggle too much for pace on either compound that he was on, really. He did say after the race that he wasn't happy with his first stint, but around the halfway mark, his Sector 1 and Sector 2 times were pretty close to Hamilton's. He started behind his teammate, managed to get ahead of him. He had the pace not to lose out in the pit stop periods. He didn't quite have enough to take on Norris after he'd stopped, but I think that SF21 is still a little bit lacking in a few areas, and that might have just been one step too many to ask. But my impression was that he was one of the most consistent on the track all day, and I think that he should be pretty happy with P8 to P6. So Charles Leclerc for me.
Okay, yeah, I can see why you've picked him, and it was always going to happen, but I disagree. I've got someone different for the first time this year, so it's not the default Lando Norris, although he did a very good drive.
He did.
I've gone with someone who we have mentioned and is not at the top of the grid by any means necessary, but I think has improved noticeably over the last 3 races in difficult track conditions, and that's Mick Schumacher. He had a terrible race last week, spun out a couple of times. Their car is a complete handful to drive. Obviously knocked off his front wing last week. Had to bounce back and continue racing. The first race he had issues as well. This race didn't go wide. Or not that we saw. It didn't have any incidents that we saw. It didn't spin out. Like we said, the Haas is a very difficult car to drive. We've seen it time and time again. And towards the end of the race, he was racing for position. He was racing Nicholas Latifi wheel to wheel for position, and that was over a handful of laps. And just seeing him drive what is arguably, which is positively the worst car on the grid against the Mercedes with a Mercedes engine, against the Williams with a Mercedes engine, and making moves and following in DRS and trying to overtake in various different places.
Whilst negotiating blue flags as well.
Whilst negotiating blue flags, I thought it showed massive growth throughout the last 3 races. It was a difficult race to pick driver of the day because a lot of the drivers were good. They were great. No one was amazingly, overwhelmingly brilliant like we have seen before. But Mick Schumacher, he's come a long way in the last 3 races, and he's developed so much. And the fact that he was racing another car, didn't have an accident, avoided the blue flags incident, didn't spin, and finished P17, which I hate to say, unless a lot of cars DNF, it could be one of Haas's best results this season.
True, yeah.
And I hate saying that, but actually that's a win for Haas. They didn't finish in the bottom 2 of the final grid. So yeah, Mick Schumacher.
Yeah, fair dues. I think he, like you say, he's shown a lot of growth, and it's precisely that kind of quiet consistency that Haas can expect to get their best results, like you say. So what they need to be doing, they need to be getting both cars to finish the race, which is what they've done. And who knows? Maybe they will be able to squeeze their way into some points. I mean, they managed it in 2019 with Kubica and in Germany. So who knows? It might pay off for them at some point. But
We'll see.
Fair play. Shout out for Mick Schumacher.